This is the material that I'm planning on using. This is a really soft, squishy thermoplastic elastomer. It's a Seb's based material, and I'm guessing that the softer it is, the better it will be for picking up ink. I've got a few kilos of this, plus some that's slightly stiffer. However, to begin with, I found some Jazz regrind, which I think will actually come out as blue because the dark blue in here is quite concentrated, and this might be a little stiffer than I want, but for a first attempt I'm going to run this anyway and just see how it comes out. But if I get good results, I'll switch over to some of the softer material and maybe put a few colours in and see how we do. Okay, I've got the mould bolted in down here. It's all going to be floating on the moving half. Ideally it would be nice if I could split the mould and put it half and half, but that's not really going to work for this design because of the tapering. I would need to bring it all the way across and then have an ejector system, so that's a non-starter. Going to have to do it like this. I haven't actually put the magnets in these because it appears to be a tight enough fit that I don't need to bother just yet. It seems to be holding itself on pretty solidly. I can crack that off with a screwdriver, but it isn't going to bounce when the mould shuts. Haven't actually tried this yet, but I've got the mould that I'm actually going to be running on the top there, and if I take my cavity block here, that will fit on there quite tightly, and again that's not going to bounce off. And then I need to just make sure I've got this the right way round. I think I have. So that's a fairly good tight press fit, and then that one will go on there like that, and so far so good. I don't need any magnets. So let's wind the speed down on the mould closing and the pressures, because I don't want to do any damage at this point. So take that down to, there we go, 10 tons. You're not going to be able to see a great deal here unfortunately, but let's shut the mould and see if anything bounces off. Here we go. Okay, that has closed, so I can now zero that out. So it's mould stroke 24.5 millimeters, which is about right because the setup should be about 25. I'm getting an error here because my mould height is now set too high, so I need to bring that down. Alright, motor on, get her up to temperature on the runner, chuck some material in. Out. It's clamping. Zero that. I think we're good. So dose. Right, that's 20 cubic centimetres. This is the first time. Let's see what happens. Went in and I heard a little bit of a fart, so some air came out. Zero residual on the material, which suggests I do need a bit more. Try that again. Okay, here we go. It's gone in. I'm going to need a screwdriver in my pocket. Alright, here we go. Ooh. Well, that wasn't actually a million miles off. I've got a short on these two, but these have actually filled. Cool, okay. That comes apart quite easily. Yeah, and there's a short on the top there as well, but the first attempt, this is going to be a slow mould cycle because I've got to keep taking these apart. If I practice the right corners. Wow. And they should push through and fall on the floor. Yeah, it definitely needs some more material, but that is very squidgy, and I suspect there's a lot of air in there, so let's reset, try that again, and I'll put a bit more plastic in. 23. 23. Let's have another look. No, still some shorting. Taking her up to 25. Pressure on the top. I'm also thinking this possibly needs quite a long cooling cycle. Six. Right, the material volume has bounced back a bit now. Suggests we're close. Right, that's 26 cubic centimetres. Very nearly there, but I am getting some sinking. I might need a bit more packing out. It's pretty good on top. Drop out nicely. Well, we're getting there. I'll show you these up close ups in a little while, but that's nearly filling it. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, this thing. Which goes where? That goes there. These are the settings that I'm currently using. Closing the mould very carefully, just 10mm per second, which is the slowest speed it will do. Trying full clamp, and a relatively slow injection seems to be working a bit better, so I'm going in quite slow, 15 cubic centimetres per second, but going a little bit quicker as I get towards the end of the fill. About half injection pressure, that's the pressure limit. I don't know if it's actually hitting that, but it won't go above 1000 bar. And then I'm using quite a lot of holding, just putting the last bit of material in. If I go back to this screen, I'm swapping over to holding pressure when I get to the last 3 cubic centimetres, putting that in at a moderate speed, and then holding it with a lot more pressure, 1850 for 5 seconds, dropping down to 250 bar for a couple of seconds at the end. So the total holding time here is about 15 seconds, which is giving the plastic chance to compress and cool down and hold its shape. On the dosing, sort of medium speeds. No back pressure on this. I don't know if a bit of back pressure would help, but I'm running it without any. And I'm currently putting 22 cubic centimetres in, and they're weighing, I've just checked a couple, about 4.5 grams, so that seems to add up. Anything else going on here? Temperatures, relatively modest. I've only just switched the machine back on, but so I'm not up to full temperature on the system yet, but I'm running at 200 on the tip and fairly low-ish on the barrel, 140 at the back, coming up to 185 at the front. Because this material undergoes a lot of shear heating, most of the heat that goes into melting the material is actually coming from the power of the screw churning it up rather than the heaters themselves, so they're just warming everything. No ejection, don't need that, that's all switched off. And the mould opening I'm going quite a bit quicker because it's not so important. The plastic will hold everything in place. So that's pretty much all there is on the settings, and it seems to be working reasonably well. I think there's room for a little bit more finessing, probably on the injection side. That's the most important, getting those numbers about right. That will just balance everything so that in theory there will be a little bit of plastic left in the barrel after it's finished, and that will just spring back slightly as it decompresses, and with a bit of luck I can soldier on with these and run quite a few off. I don't know what that was like watching, but it was getting pretty warm towards the end and I had to go grab a pair of gloves because my hands were starting to burn. But it ran okay with a bit of playing with the settings. It always takes a little bit of time to figure out exactly what speeds and injection settings you need and what you can and can't get away with, how fast you need to run it. Just a bit of trial and error basically. Every mould is different, but I ran all three sets in the end, and I got some reasonably convincing mouldings coming off. I was expecting them to be using about 6 grams each, but they're actually coming in at about 4.5 when I've weighed them. This is a little bit stiffer than I would like, so I'm going to switch to that other material in a little while and have another go. Acid test, I suppose, is do they actually work. So if I grab a stamp, here we go. Well, okay, it does work. Yeah, okay, I'm doing that. I think getting the alignment may be a little bit of an exercise in practice, but I'm not doing too bad. Yeah, at least you can sort of tell what it is. Okay, that's doable, and they are working. I can even do it left-handed, almost. Yeah, I think getting the alignment on these is going to take a little bit of practice, but anyway, there we go. There's a butane molecule. So doing these in different colours and with different inks should work quite well. I did realise that I'd actually missed a stamp, so I had to do an extra set of plates, but I'll let you guess what that one was. It's not actually an individual chemical bond, but there's something else that is often used in these kind of molecular diagrams, so I figured I ought to do that as well. Plus it gave me an opportunity to do a blank tile just in case it's needed. But yeah, I'm reasonably convinced with these. They do the job, and they're fairly easy to mould. Cycle time was a bit slow, probably a minute and a half towards the end, but better to go slow than mess them all up. I did get quite a few dodgy ones as I was going along, but all of this will regrind, it can be used again. So next step is to run some different colours in that softer material and see if they work any better, and then we can have a close-up look at these under the microscope and see just how well I've done. I haven't noticed any obvious offset. All of the stamps do seem to line up correctly, and they were coming out of the mould, so there's obviously no overhang at the parting line, and I only had about 100 microns to play with, so this thing has indeed lined up pretty well. I think maybe some slightly better venting on the bottom could help, and possibly a bit of extra gating at the top, just to help fill this thing, because it is quite a lot of plastic going in. But obviously when you're cutting these initially, you start as small as you can, because you can always open them up. If you overcut them to begin with, then there's not a lot you can do about it other than cut the whole thing again, which I don't want to do. So anyway, that's where we're at the moment. I'll do a close-up inspection of these, and then we'll have a proper play and see if this thing's actually viable. Here's some of the finished mouldings up close, and you can see the tapering sides on these. It's worked reasonably well. They came out of the mould okay. This is the first batch I ran in the regrind, and this is quite stiff, so I suspect this has got some polyethylene mixed in with it. It's a trick I've used quite a lot in the past. You start with a very soft sebbed material, and this is I don't know exactly, probably about an 88 on the Shore Hardness scale, and then if you want it a bit stiffer, you just blend in a bit of polyethylene. I think polypropylene will probably work as well, but although that works, I thought it was just a little bit too rigid, so I went with a softer material and ran them off in a few different colours. They did come out of the mould okay. You can see the ridges down the side here where I did the slightly smaller cuts all the way up. I think this first one is 50 micron step, and then the next is 100 and 100, and then the rest of these are 50s. The important one was at the centre because that's where the parting line is, and you can just see along this edge that it's not quite spot on, but it's not far off. That one looks better. And yeah, working my way around it, they look reasonable. So I'm not very far out, but certainly there wasn't an overhang. I think possibly this thing is like maybe 50 microns out, but it didn't make a lot of difference. The other thing that I noticed quite early on was I was getting all these lines on it. That's basically because the plastic is jetting in, and if I show you this one, which is a horrible short shot, you can see how from the gate the plastic is just squirming its way in the mould. It's not filling it particularly cleanly. Maybe I could have got away with putting a bigger gate on there. I might try that just to see if it helps, but that basically is why I'm getting this mottled effect around the sides, and you can see it here when I change colours. This is the mystery stamp that I alluded to, and you can see it's basically just a hexagon. This is a benzene ring, and these do crop up quite a lot in chemistry, so rather than creating 1 out of 6 carbons and half a dozen hydrogens, I thought let's just make one of these and be done with it. And this also gave me an excuse to make a dummy stamp, which is just the circle, and a couple of others in green, but these are kind of an add-on, not really essential. Was getting these white marks coming through. Not entirely sure what was going on. I think that may have been because I was trying to fill it too quickly, so I slowed down the injection. Probably going in at about 30 cubic centimetres a second, maybe 20-25. It was taking a second or so to fill the mould. Relatively modest pressures. I think it was about half the maximum was my pressure limit, and I'm not even sure it was using all of that. But then I was putting a lot of holding force to complete the fill and really pack this in the mould. I was still getting a little bit of sinking. You can see that the end there on that black one is shiny because the inside bit is domed down a little bit, and I think you can see that on possibly this one as well if I get it in the light, and obviously there's a blowhole there, so it hasn't packed out quite as well as I would have wanted, but I've only run this mould a couple of times so far, so I'm still learning. The alignment on the stamps themselves, that's pretty good. It should be about 0.5 millimetre from the edge, and that looks pretty clean there, and similar on the top. It's a lot cleaner on the top, which suggests I should probably have gated from the bottom, but it doesn't really matter, it still works. I have tested these with a couple of friends who immediately put ink on the wrong end. It's going to happen. Perhaps I could have made this a little bit more conspicuous, but I'm not going to recut it at this stage. I want to get some feedback. And also I found that if you push this too far into an ink pad, you can put ink on the edge here, so maybe the impression itself could have done with going a bit deeper. These are a 1 millimetre slot drill, 1 millimetre deep. Maybe I could have gone 1.5, would have helped, but they do work reasonably well. Getting the alignment isn't particularly easy. I have played around with a few techniques, including mocking up some graph paper just to help align it, but with an ink pad you only really need a quick dab on the pad, and that will pick up enough ink, and then I can do a stamp, and the stamps are clear enough to be visible. Getting the alignment, I found if you come right the way up to the circle and then go away, and I wasn't looking at that, I was looking at the screen, so let's try that again, over there, and about that. Oh, I think I've messed that one up as well. No, there we go. You do need to be looking directly over the top to align these, but having tested them out with a 12-year-old, he got the hang of it fairly quickly and did a far better job than I did. So I think a little bit of practice and you're okay with these. The ink does seem to be washable. I have found that having there you go, you can see some ink residues on there. They only stamp a few times before you need to re-ink them, so the ink doesn't last very long and it does wipe off fairly easily. And I have tried washing them as well, and the ink does clean up pretty well. So I've got a kit of 16 of these. I think another thing that I want to do is, where I've got my ink stamp, I'm thinking of making possibly a surround with 4 holes in it, so that I can actually stand these in the ink stamp, because I've got 4 of each colour, so that might be an idea. It shouldn't take too long to make a quick frame out of a fairly cheap material. So that's an easy add-on, I suppose. And then the only other thing I've got to do is write some instructions to try and clarify how you use these things. But for a fairly quick attempt at putting this together, I think there's room for improvement, certainly. See a little bit of flash around the edge of that one as well, so certainly I need to practice a little bit more on moulding these and try and get my settings a little bit more finessed. But they do the job, they work, and I've moulded a few sets, so I'll pass them around to people who might be interested, get a bit of feedback, and if I need to cut some new stamps, at least I know what I'm doing now. So interesting project. I shall make use of these in some future videos perhaps.